and welcome to those of you who are joining us for what is in the UK and in Germany, a sort of evening discussion, but from wherever you are joining us around the world, you're very welcome to this event. Just to provide a little bit of context before I introduce Volker to you, this event has been, I suppose, conceived to follow a symposium that has been happening over the past 2 days at Manchester Fashion Institute, part of the Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK, a symposium looking at face masks and head coverings, the symposium called Face Off, the provocations and possibilities of face masks and head coverings. The 2 days of that conference have now ended, and we've had a really sort of rich discussion, bringing people from all over the world, across different cultures, and reflecting from the past and the present about the nature of masks and head coverings that we are, because of the pandemic, engaging with really as never before. And I think in bringing this event, these 2 days together, Elizabeth and I could think of no better way to conclude than with speaking to the painter and artist Volker Hermes. Obviously, you've joined us, so there's a sense of me sort of preaching to the choir in terms of your knowledge of Volker's work, and of course you'll all be familiar with undoubtedly sort of recent sort of media coverage of Volker's work. Just last month, of course, a feature in American Vogue, a recent collaboration again towards the close of 2020 between Volker and the auction house Christie's. And I'm sure many of you will also follow Volker on Instagram as well. And I suppose the work, when we sort of think about Volker in the context of the Face Off Symposium, is his Hidden Portraits series. And I just wanted to start, I think, this discussion by reading a sort of description that Volker himself, that you've written of your work and that you attached to your Instagram posts. So this might seem a bit odd and a bit meta as I'm reading your words back to you. In Volker's words then, of his Hidden Portraits series, they are a contemporary view of art history, of paintings as a part of representation. I hide individuality behind magnificent surfaces and tried to incorporate a contemporary discourse on codes of clothing and society into historical paintings. And that discourse is established through, Volker, what you term a series of interventions, and largely through Photoshop. So I suppose then to get the proceedings underway, firstly, obviously, Volker, thank you so very much for joining us today and giving us some time. And I wanted to start, I suppose, thinking about sort of first principles and your inspiration. As a conference, we've spent the past sort of 2 days thinking about sort of masks and head coverings, and that idea of masks concealing. So in terms then of your Hidden Portraits series, what was your inspiration for that? Because although it's a project that the world, if you like, is maybe relatively new to, as you said previously, this is a body of work that you've been working on for sort of over 10 years, I think. So what were some of the initial inspirations for that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it started a couple of years after I finished my art academy, and I was in my studio, and I was, after the years of more or less living a kind of cliche, as an art student, I smashed into reality. And then I started to think about the role of an artist in society and the role of art in society. And in my work, it's really like the art history is always very present, not only as heritage of my own work, also as a kind of partner. They are really close to me personally. That's my personal perspective on art. So I looked back and I found these portraits, and I choose portraits because they are more like us. No, it's not religious or mythological, no metaphor. They are like us, painted as regular people, but they were an elite. You know, they were very rich, and they demanded a lot of things of the artists. So I was directly in the discussion, what wants society from art? What has art to deliver? So this was more or less the kind of situation where I found these portraits. And I found that there are so many informations in this whole portraits that are telling us about the society, and about representation, about status, about rank. And so this was the beginning when I started the work with portraits.
And you've got some sort of images. I don't know at what point you wanted to sort of feed those into the discussion, but whenever you want to sort of share stuff, then by all means do so. And I suppose for me, what's interesting, if this sort of you're finding these portraits, and as you said, recognizing cues of sort of status, of sort of visual communication that maybe is different to today. I think still we convey our status, but we do that in different ways. But why then, I suppose, why was that, as I understand it, and by all means correct, you know, why was that very much, if you like, a sort of private project? Why is it only more recently that you've then maybe made that more public? What occasioned that change? To
make them public? Yeah, I mean, the first years I made them just for me. All these books I made just for me. And to publish them, to join Instagram, for example, this was work of a friend of mine, and she persuaded me to go there, because before I'm still feel kind of old-fashioned in these things, and I didn't really like it. And she said, you have to go there. And so last summer I just made an account. And then I started uploading things, very, very naive, and still very naive. And at one point, this whole attention came to me, and this was very, very surprising and overwhelming and wonderful. And so now I'm on Instagram, and a lot of people are reacting on this.
I mean, you mentioned that those interventions that you're making with your work, in terms of, obviously you are a painter, but in terms of your hidden portraits, obviously that's presented, you're largely using sort of Photoshop. So when you were doing this work privately, as it were, was that essentially saved on your computer in files and then not sort of, well, obviously then not?
I just showed it. I showed it to nobody. So it was just a private thought. And it's not painting, because I don't want to paint like an old master. I think we have a contemporary way of painting, and we have to, because our visual world is different, our materials are different. So I think it's not a solution to paint like an old master. So I decided to work with them with Photoshop, because I can work with them as an artist. And it took some years to manage Photoshop, because I taught myself this program. So it was really, really a process. And then I had a lot of works, and then some of them I printed out and I pinned them on the wall in my studio. And so some friends came and saw them and said, you must publish them, because you're working on them since years. So.
And is the sort of hidden portraits series that you're doing, is that very much the sole focus of your work? Are you still sort of painting? Is there a sort of parallel and sort of shared experiences, if you like, between your various outputs, or is the hidden portraits very much your focus now?
Yeah, right now it's my absolute focus, because I have so many reactions, and I'm every day more or less involved with this. So at the moment there's no time to paint. But the years before, it was like 90% painting and 10% hidden portraits. And I'm sure that there will be times where it's really different again. But right now the focus is on hidden portraits. Yes.
Can we, at that point then, again, as I said, I'm sure everyone will be very familiar with your work through Instagram, which I think now has over sort of 100,000 followers. So very envious of that.
Oh, not that much.
Could we maybe have a look at some of your work in terms of sort of sharing with us, just so we can get a visual sense of some of those points that you've been talking about in those interventions.
So I will share now my screen, my desktop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I decided to show it by Photoshop, so I can zoom in and I can, you know, explain maybe a bit. So I'm sharing now. Okay. Okay. Maybe we start with my boucher. I already. So we have, this is my work, Hidden Boucher. And you want me to explain a bit what I did?
Absolutely, yeah. Talk us through the process. We can see you've obviously sort of layered two images there. Yeah, so if you maybe talk about perhaps the relationship between them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a wonderful portrait, and it's a wonderful example for a very representative portrait, because it's a full-length portrait. This was the most expensive thing you can order. He was very well known, so he was very expensive, and she is in her dress in the garden. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting, and her dress is like kind of, it doesn't, for our eyes, it's not simple, but it is simple. So it is a kind of, I'm playing with my sheeps in the garden.
Yeah, there's that sort of naivety almost.
So I didn't say no.
Oh, sorry. The sound just went a little bit sort of strange at my end now. I don't know whether it has had a problem there with the.
Sometimes what
I'm getting it.
Good is if he Volker might consider shutting off his video while he's sharing his screen, because sometimes there can be too much bandwidth going on.
I think we are back on the track, huh? Because
that's good. Yes, we can hear. Absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So where we are at Boucher, and she's standing in the garden, and I decided that I wanted to, you know, hide her beautiful face, because there's so much going on in that portrait, but our first access is through her face. And we look at her, she's very elegant, very young, and we take the rest of the portrait a bit for granted. It's a garden. But there are a lot of other informations, and I thought, like, I'm blocking the access to the face, and giving the possibility to have a kind of new look to that portrait. And in that case, my focus was on this, I think it's called in English choker, is it right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, around her neck. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a kind of very, very delicate lace around her neck. And this was in that time was an absolutely key. Very fashionable. And had it in the elite, also it came down to regular people. They were wearing much simpler versions, but it was at that time very, very, very popular. And I made kind of just only out of this part. I multiplied this kind of lace, and I create a kind of strange helmet. And it's like I wanted to make it somehow acceptable, plausible.
Yeah.
But to create something which is totally strange to that whole portrait.
I think for me, what's really interesting, I mean, in terms of sort of my role as a sort of cultural historian, I mean, if I were using the original portrait as a sort of teaching aid, I'd be sort of asking my students to look at the clothing and the dress accessories and, you know, the sort of the bow, the flowers, the hat, and almost in a sense try to decode. But I think as you said previously, whilst these would be, these visual cues, these clues to status would be evident for people, you know, contemporaries at the time that this portrait is created, I think that's something that in the 21st century we see very differently. We can, as you said, understand that this is a lady maybe of wealth, and that's that's at least one of the messages and layers that this painting is conveying. But the relative sort of status, the relative priority of each of these objects is difficult for us maybe to read. You know, we're used to sort of Instagram and being saturated with images, but we do sort of, I think, perceive them and engage with them quite differently. So I think for me, your intervention here is really interesting because, as you say, what you're, it seems to me, doing is putting those cues, those clues to identity and status that we might sort of overlook in the 21st century, we might understand. You're making us sort of focus more perhaps on them and think about them within the composition of this individual's identity, or at least how they wanted to be identified and perceived.
Yeah, this little detail of her of this lace, I made it much more important. So now the whole head is covered with it. And I even decorated it with some bows to make it more plausible into the whole composition of that work. And maybe I can explain a bit. My general approach is that I don't add anything from outside. I just take parts of the painting itself. This is more or less to show my enormous respect for that portraits. A lot of people are doing interventions of historical works, but I don't mix different paintings. I don't add a mobile phone or something like that, contemporary stuff, to historical works. And I really want to keep them in their original spirit and also like dignity, but still changing them from contemporary view, because this helmet, this form, is something what we know today.
Yeah.
They didn't know about this kind of helmets, maybe in uniforms or something, or armor, but not in this context. So it's a new contemporary look I invent to this historical portrait. And if I'm telling that it has to be plausible, there's here one detail. You see this kind of blue robe here I had to add. This is because when I'm changing portraits and I'm adding stuff, sometimes the architecture collapses because of my interventions. They were perfect before, and now I'm changing things, and the whole system collapsed, and I don't want that. So I have to add some parts of a composition to make them again plausible in the original sense. And here, for example, this helmet is really a massive figure in the portrait. Before, it was just this really light and light face, and now we have this heavy construction. We have this heavy part here and this heavy part there, and then it needed a kind of combination. The part here was too weak, you know, whatever, from the structure of the work. So sometimes I have to add some parts which are not like my original thought, but they have to be done to keep the spirit and the composition of the work.
I like that idea then, that it's a sort of, you know, across the centuries, a dialogue between you as a painter and then the original sort of portraitist in terms of the sort of navigating, I suppose, the construction of their work, but also their presentation of identity of the city here. I'm wondering then, as you're saying that, in terms of thinking about the sense of balance and sense of respect, does that mean then, as you've worked on a number of images in your hidden portrait series, do you tend to follow certain painters, certain artists? I mean, do you, if you like, have a sort of affinity with the way that certain artists have created or present sitters, such that you know you can, if you like, work readily with them? Or does it simply respond to individual portraits and a sort of a spark that comes from many different works?
I mean, I browse almost every day around in some archives, in collections, and I find this works quite intuitively. It's not like that I'm searching for special times or some special artists or like Renaissance or Rococo or whatever. It's really like, it's a general search. And I just fall in love with some portraits. But there, of course, there are some artists which are really easier, and some artists I don't use. For example, I don't touch Vermeer. Because his lightning is somehow mysterious, and you can't really, you're always breaking the portrait if you add something, or if you change something. It's impossible to get this result that it's somehow plausible. So I don't touch Vermeer.
And so presumably then, if Vermeer is sort of, is that as a result of experimentation where you've tried to work and it hasn't, in your view, kind of produced results that
yeah,
work?
I tried one portrait which is not so well known, and I tried it and I stopped immediately because it didn't work. With every work, I start with a kind of general concept. It's not like that I'm start moving around some single pearls. It's really like that I have this idea and then I have a rough test whether it's working or not, and I immediately recognize that it's not working with that Vermeer. And Van Dyck, for example, Van Dyck is it's easier to handle because he was one of the artists who were dealing with kind of fashionable and representative portrait. So it's more easy with him.
But I also think, I mean, as you're talking about Van Dyck, of course, lots of portraits of the English royal family, the Carolingian court, Charles I and Henrietta Maria. But I think also that, to me, there seems an affinity because I don't think it was the painting that was called The Great Peace. I can't remember what the painting is, but it's a portrait of Charles I with his wife Henrietta Maria. And I know that the dress originally that Henrietta Maria was wearing when Van Dyck first painted it, it was a completely different color. But it was only when sort of nearing the end of completing the portrait that the dress was then painted out and a new color by Van Dyck was substituted. And again, I think that idea of sort of experimentation and thinking about that sense of balance, I can see why there would be a sort of affinity with you in the 21st century coming to his work and then also making those or thinking about those sort of changes or intersections. Absolutely.
I mean, last year there was a big exhibition of Van Dyck in Munich, and I went to see this exhibition, and they made a lot of research which accompanied this exhibition, and then they found out by X-raying the works that behind some of the portraits in the area of the head, that there was a blank space in the background. And they found out that he made a lot of portraits more or less to go. So he had the complete portrait with dresses, and then the people came by on a travel or something like that, and they choose the portrait and there was a white space from the head, and then he filled in the head and the face, and so it was quite fast. They didn't have to be there for months for all this work. And so this was his way to deal with kind of representative portraits.
And I think, again, as you're talking there, I'm thinking about an exhibition, I think, well, not last year, maybe a couple of years ago, here in London at the National Portrait Gallery, which focused on 17th century miniatures, so very small portraits. And often the way that was done was a sort of similar way. You'd pick the rough that you wanted, you'd pick the hairstyle that you wanted, and then from that, the artists would then compose your image.
Yeah.
It strikes me, and I think, you know, commentators made this at the time, that it's sort of similar. I mean, obviously not wholly the same, but there's analogies with a sort of Instagram filter kind of thing. You know, it's a sort of maybe 16th, 17th century equivalent, or also people have suggested. So again, I think there are, it seems to me, these layers, these affinities and dialogues between your work and interests now with those of the past. Absolutely. Okay, I wonder if we could possibly have a look, just sort of develop that discussion with another series of images.
Well, maybe we can go over to a guy. If we start to think about head coverings, we have to think of powdered wigs.
We do indeed.
Powdered wigs also as a sign of rank. Very, very important to enter a kind of a certain level of society. And they always, most of the time, come with a very self-confident attitude, a male self-confident attitude.
Yeah.
And I thought something like, you want representation, you want a powdered wig, you get a powdered wig. So I extended the whole powdered wig and covered his individuality behind this sign of his status. And again, from my perspective as a painter, if you have all these gray locks and you cover his face, you have this kind of too much gray, you know, you must have a structure. So I decided in this work to extend his this kind of ropes and wrap it around him, like also a bit trapped.
Yeah,
trapped in this kind of status, in kind of wealth, and also a bit like his exposed self-confidence. It's a bit ridiculous now.
Yeah,
he accepted in the original way, but now in my intervention, it's a bit ridiculous. It's really a bit funny also, because they're generally, I can't change their pose. I can't change their attitude. And if I'm adding something really strange or funny, I can insecure this whole system of I'm very assured of my position in society.
Yeah. And
this is also kind of contemporary view on things, that we don't accept this kind of roles anymore, and I totally support that.
Yeah.
So we can, I can do my intervention. I can insecure the whole system of male domination.
I think what's also interesting, you know, making that point about, you know, making through your interventions his almost the expose, if you like, the sort of the folly, if you like, of his confidence. But I think also, and that idea of the sort of ridiculousness through sort of exaggeration. But these were also, I think, dialogues that were going on at the time, in the sense of not necessarily with the sort of the period that this portrait is produced, but certainly commentaries on sort of powdered wigs, the extraordinary dimensions and height that they were expanded to, both in terms of men, male wearers, and female. And, you know, if we think about, you know, sartorial groupings, you know, you have the sort of incroyable, or you have the macaronis, you know, in those cases, sort of the macaronis being men. And again, the exaggeration of their clothing, whether it was particularly tight or whether it was emphasizing a particular part of the body that contemporaries focused on then. So that unease with sort of extremes of extending parts of the body through sort of physical protrusions in the case of hair here, or that discomfort in the past, and as you say, in the present too, of exposing or rather emphasizing, perhaps is a better word, emphasizing your wealth and doing it to a degree that becomes sort of distasteful. And I think in some ways that the sort of the powdered wig was sort of caught up in a lot of those debates. So
yeah, I mean, the wigs, especially in France, were also in time of Marie Antoinette, were really like used for information. Marie Antoinette invented this really, really amazingly high, I think they were called poofs, these poofs on her head, and she made kind of decoration, and they made commands. She made commands to political situations by putting items in her wig. So this was a kind of, the attraction was on her hair. And I tried to break this ironically and covering the faces now completely with this hair, with this wrong hair.
And I think that's interesting, that idea of, as you say, kind of concealment. You know, his conventional identity is here completely lost to us. And I think that is very much a theme that we were talking about in our conference over the past 2 days, the way that when we were thinking about face masks, but how a face mask in covering the lower part of your face conceals, but actually in concealing, it actually maybe reveals more of you. It enables other parts of your body or your identity, or creates new possibilities. And I think I perhaps sort of know the answer here, but you know, I'm guessing then that in terms of your work and concealment, you would perhaps suggest that the act of concealing does actually clarify and reveal more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, every concealing is a kind of statement. Even if you put a white blanket over your head, it tells something about your intentions or your character. But in that case, you know, they can't do, the poor people on the portrait, they can't do anything because I'm hiding them. Yeah. So it's more or less showing something about me and my side of the world. So this is so like I'm sending messages by different ways of concealing and hiding the persons. And this is my intention as a contemporary artist. You know, it's not like, and I'm not only like, it's not only a joke. It's quite often a lot of humor inside, but it's a kind of it's a work of an artist. Yeah. It's contemporary art. Yeah.
And I'm wondering then, I suppose, you know, just with that point there about the sort of pandemic and wearing masks as we all now are, has the fact that we are all in sort of public life concealing our identities more in terms of our face, has that made you, in working on the Hidden Portraits series, has that made you sort of think about your work differently or experiment differently? Are you aware of the sort of pandemic having a different sort of influence on your work?
I must admit, not that much, because this whole body of work is, as you said, is quite old, and it's like 10 years of work, and I've more or less been that reality crashed into my work. And it's not like that I'm reacting on something that's happening now. It's more like somehow this pandemic touched my work. Yeah. But of course, maybe I can tell a short story. Sure. I saw a dance piece this year in late summer. One of the few things I was able to see, and of course, under very, very special circumstances, not so many people were allowed to attend. We had to wear masks. It was a dance piece for a solo dancer. And I was sitting in the audience with my mask, and then the dancer appeared on the stage, and she was wearing a hood, a golden hood, and she was completely covered. And while I was watching her, I felt my own breath on my skin under the mask. And I thought, I'm feeling exactly the same like her. And this is totally special, that you suddenly have the connection between somebody on the stage and while you're feeling your own breath under the mask. And this is maybe something that changes in my work from Hidden Portraits, that I feel a bit more I can experience a bit more what it means to be covered, because I feel it every day and I see it every day.
Mm. That's a kind of a really nice point. And I think, again, as we were saying in the conference, a comment that was made that it's unusual. I mean, we're all around the world engaging with masks, and it's rare for there to be a single moment where we are all having such engagement with the same item of dress and clothing. So I think you're right that those sort of affinities have become more apparent. I suppose one thing that I've sort of noticed with your work, and it'd be interesting to speak to, through your the medium with which you share a lot of your work, Instagram, you also are using the Instagram story function to post little animations of the sort of process of kind of concealing or emphasizing that the interventions that you're making. Is this something that is a kind of a new departure in response to using the platform of Instagram, or is this use of little sort of videos, or is that something you'd been doing previously? It's just that the story function on Instagram lends itself to you now showing it. No,
this is more or less brand new, and this appeared when I'm joining a group show in a museum here in Western Germany, and during the first lockdown, they asked the artists to take over the Instagram channel by stories. Mm. And I thought I must find my own forum to show my work there. I didn't want to show photos of me or my studio. This was not my intention. So I thought I have to invent for me a form that suits to this medium Instagram story, like 15 seconds of something, and it has to be, it has to fit to my works. So I thought, what can I do? And I said, okay, you never used iMovie on your computer. Let's try this. And then I tried to do something with it, and the results are my little animations on Instagram. So this is brand new.
Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of time, and I would like to sort of bring other people in to ask some questions. I see there's one question in the chat already that I'll ask, but I wonder if we could maybe possibly see a sort of another image, and then we'll use that to sort of wrap up the sort of dialogue between the two of us. And then if people do want to sort of add some questions to the chat, or be thinking about questions, then I will direct those to Volker, or you can ask. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, this is a work I did with a collaboration with Christie's. And usually I use works where the person is more centered. Like this, first when I saw this painting, I thought, oh my God, this is a strange painting, but I loved it, you know. And I really wanted to do something because there are quite obvious a lot of informations in that portrait, and I wanted to give this kind of another twist. Because she's sitting on a fountain, and there's this huge lion head in the background, like this male lion head. And she's sitting there in a white dress, and she has some feathers in her head, on her head, and some tiny flowers, like very young, fresh, and a bit. Also, I thought a bit delivered, this whole situation of this massive lion head behind her, and I wanted to give her a kind of different strength.
Yeah.
And again, we all look in her beautiful face, and this is more or less enough. Then maybe we see the dove, which is quite strange, the dove here. But we don't look at the green leaves here. We are just catched by her gaze, you know. And so I covered her with parts of her dress, but I kept the original position of these dove feathers, and now they are much sharper, and she's more or less lion head by herself.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's, yeah. Mm.
you can me?
Yeah, sorry, we can
Hello?
now. You just lost you a little bit towards the end there.
Yeah, maybe my landlord's watching Netflix, and this is why my
But I think you're right though. I mean, in the, if you like, the original, it's almost as though, and even with the lean of the lady sort of being defeated and in some ways by the lion or overwhelmed. But I think in your intervention, to use your phrase, there's a sense that she now kind of almost kind of competes more equally, if you like, with the surroundings. But also, I think again, it alludes. Well, not really, that's not the right word. It directs us, if you like, as a 21st century viewer, to the elements of her clothing that perhaps convey her status or her identities. There's almost a sort of clarification, I think, that you
yeah.
are.
And I kept a lot of things which are for me important, like the small flowers or the blossoms here. I kept it and I rearranged them into my new headpiece here. But I wanted to keep this up because I think it's important to understand this painting.
Yeah.
And but now I think it's before it's more like she's holding an umbrella and now she's holding a weapon.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
So, and I really like this idea to change a portrait in this way.
Mm. It's interesting that you you mentioned the work that you were doing with Christie's just before the end of the year, where, as you said, this work of art featured. Within that same body of work, there's a bust as well that was included. And I just wonder if you could talk sort of about that a little bit, because obviously, to me, I mean, again, I don't know how it was produced or what it was made of, but that didn't seem to me, as I saw it on the Christie's website, to be an intervention via Photoshop. So I wondered what you've used or how that bust had been created.
No, that's Photoshop.
Oh, is it Photoshop too? Okay.
That's but this is quite difficult. Maybe I didn't prepare this, but I can try to search for it. Here we are.
Here we go. These are.
So I got the photo of that bust and I changed it by Photoshop. But this is absolutely challenging, I must admit. It's challenging to change it by Photoshop, this three-dimensional work, to change it in a kind of, that it looks like it was made like this.
Yeah.
And also here I wanted to, she's depicted as Flora, and all these flowers here in this marble bust, and I wanted to give a kind of new mask thing, which is also quite contemporary, but included in this very, very traditional 19th century bust. Mm. And I really love this work because she didn't lose anything of her dignity and of her spirit, but it's completely different now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that, and I think that's a nice sort of point in terms of the question that I alluded to that had come into the chat. This is a question from Veronica. Firstly, thanking you for the fascinating work that you're sharing with us and talk. But she asks, my question is regarding your work that is based on existing artwork. How do you choose those portraits?
It's more or less whether I like them or not. It's really, really like a personal story. It's when I'm searching the archives or collections, of course I'm searching them with one eye, like how can I use them for my art? and some of the works I really love, I can't use them because there's no way for me to, there's no point to start. But the rest is just, okay, I find a portrait very interesting, and I save it, and I want to work with it. It's really a private, very intuitive search and travel. And sometimes I feel like, oh, I really have to do something Baroque. And sometimes I feel like I have to do some early Dutch Renaissance thing in black and white. So this is my personal mood in that point.
Yeah.
But
And when you were working in terms of your work with Christie's that you're showing here, had you prepared this work in advance, or was that a sort of conversation between you and Christie's about the sort of images that you would use, and did they provide a steer for you, or was that, as I said, very much work that you already knew you wanted to work with?
No, this was really, really, really exciting, because they more or less showed me what they are going to sell, and so some were very, very fast. That, okay, we're going to have this portrait in the auction. Maybe you're interested in that, or maybe in this one. And so they showed me a variety of portraits, and I choose the ones, like, again, very, very private, that I want to work with. And then the owners were asked whether they want to give permission to, and then I started.
Okay.
So it was offered by Christie's, and I picked my choice.
Yeah. Okay. And so a question here from Theodore. Would you ever work with contemporary figuration?
Not in this way. Not not by hiding them or concealing them. Maybe in a different way, but not as a kind of hidden portrait. No.
And is that because, in terms of the way that the clothing is used and status, you don't have those same sort of visual cues, and so those interventions would not be, perhaps, as you might deem it, necessary? Or
no, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary, because they are part of our contemporary codes. We know what's going on these portraits. And so my point that I'm exaggerating some parts to make clear what kind of information is in this portrait, it's not necessary. Maybe there are other things necessary to deal with contemporary arts, but not this kind of, I want to give a key to codes that we have forgotten, because they are our contemporary codes.
On that then, and maybe thinking about that point, and sort of building on the point that the question that sort of Theodore asks there, what about sort of looking at perhaps sort of other cultures? So, for example, I don't know, 19th century Chinese dress or something like that. Is that something that might appeal? I mean, I think a lot of your work focuses on, sort of Western and kind of continental European works. Would sort of different cultures, is that an appeal?
Yeah, it is an idea, and I already saved some of these different cultures. But to deal with these works with a kind of respect, you have to know a lot about these different codes. So I have to do quite huge research on Asian clothes and their codes and their meanings before I can start to point on things. Otherwise, I would be like maybe pointing on things which are not true or not really the real point, because I don't know it. I'm familiar with these Western codes, so it's easier for me to pick it and exaggerate it. But as soon as I know more about other cultures, I will do it in this way too, in this, again, like 19th century or even earlier, or very, very early Chinese or Japanese portraits. They are beautiful, and but at the moment I don't know much about them, and I have to know more about them.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the point that you were saying about that, the respect, and the balance, that this, the dangers of sort of cultural appropriation, which we're obviously seeing, you know, sort of across the sort of fashion world. You know, I appreciate the need to avoid that. So we have a question here from Liberty. And she says, it's so interesting how your pieces maintain their mood and yet change so much. She asks, which of your images is the first of your collection that you've made, and what inspired you to focus on covering the face?
The first thing I made, I don't think it's existing anymore, because I think it was too bad Photoshop. But I think it was Richelieu, a portrait of Richelieu in his red robe, and I covered the whole robe over Richelieu. This was because of this position, and I thought, okay, take this Richelieu, and I give you your robe. But I don't think it's existing anymore. I think I've thrown it away. And the second part of the question, why the face? Because the face is our first address in the portraits, and sometimes it's the only address. We are going through museums and we are taking a look at portraits, and we are deciding, okay, she's handsome, he's handsome, he's maybe grumpy or something like that. And this is our way to deal with these portraits, because we don't know so much about the other informations which are in the portrait. And it's a bit like if you're standing in front of a general of a painting, and you hold your hand and you cover one part because you want to focus on the other part. And so I'm covering the face, and it's like that you're losing one sense and the other senses get more sharp.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one question that came to my mind when you were talking about your early work on Richelieu, the fact that you maybe don't have that work anymore. You know, how in a sense are you thinking about sort of preserving your work? You know, obviously it exists sort of as a sort of digital file, which you know, is not kind of so unique in the sense that other artists obviously, you know, work in a sort of digital media. But, you know, in terms of, you know, how you're sort of filing your work and thinking about, if you like, sort of, you know, posterity, how do you sort of keep it in the public domain beyond Instagram? Is that something you're increasingly thinking about?
About preserving the files, for example, I'm a painter, and this is quite difficult for me because I'm not raised in the system of photo files.
Yeah, exactly.
And I still have to learn about this, and I have hundreds of storages external, and I'm changing all the time and serving and saving all the time, and I'm totally hysterical about it because I'm raised in a different system of, like, you have paintings in a shelf. Yep. This is my way, and try to keep them dry and you know, not too cold. But I'm learning with this. You know, this is one of the challenges, changing the technical part of your work, is that you have to learn more about this whole stuff. But I'm trying to learn a lot there, trying to save them. Yeah.
We have a few more, a couple more questions. An interesting one from Kat, who asks, what about non-human faces? Do you ever mask animals or plants?
I never did. No. But I have, like, different chapters. For example, I have a chapter for kids, for children. And this is a whole complete different story, because I started to cover children in the way I did it with adults. Yeah. And that completely did not work. It was really, really brutal, and really like, you know, the connotation of this was completely what I didn't want to show. And so I thought I have to invent another version, because it's interesting how children were portrayed. They had to wear this kind of adult dresses, which were just made smaller for them. So they had to wear these very uncomfortable things. And I decided to create like funny mask, like carnival mask, to give them back their the fun in this thing they have. So this is one of the chapters. Also another chapter is like the miniature portraits, the small ones, but animals also I never had as topic now.
Okay. In terms of another possible area of focus, Famida, hello Famida, she asks, would you ever consider engaging with globally mega iconic pieces, a Mona Lisa or Munch's The Scream, a Picasso or Monet? But she then asks as a sort of addendum to that, do you have to seek copyright to use any works?
The first part of the questions, I try to avoid Mona Lisa or the girl with the pearl earring, because too many things were done with them. Poor Mona Lisa. And I try to save her from my interventions. And of course, I have very, very famous portraits within my work, but most of the times I'm more interested in these not so famous works, because they are also very, very telling, and sometimes they're even more telling than these really, really icons that are icons for other reasons.
Absolutely.
And there was the second part of this?
Asking about copyright to use.
Okay. Yes, I mean the copyrights for the paintings are gone, because the painters are more than 75 years dead, so they lost their rights. But there are still rights from photographs.
Yeah.
But I usually get the files from museums, and most of the times the photographer gave their rights to the museum. And if the museum gives it in a kind of open access, what a lot of big museums are practicing, I can take them as base for my work. But generally, I'm protected by the right of free art, because this is I'm an artist, and I'm producing new artworks. So I'm protected by this right too. But it's a big thought about rights, and I must admit that I'm quite shy. I don't use works where I'm not sure, and quite often I write emails to museums or collections and ask when I'm not sure. And most of the times they're very friendly, and I show them my work, and they said, I want to use it for that, it's okay. So this is for me, I'm in a quite good situation right now, especially after so many people are supporting my work. It's getting more and more easy to get the permission.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I think, I suppose, just picking up also on Famida's point in terms of what you were saying with your work with Christie's, where you're sort of asking permission of the owners of those works before sale. So I suppose there's another element or dimension to permission, depending on, as you've alluded to, the collections or the nature, the status of the work that you're engaged with. And a question here from Elizabeth, which will make our sort of final question. I'm conscious of the hour being upon us. Which period and medium is your favorite to intervene into, and why?
I think that I'm really, really, really interested in Renaissance. Because first, from a technical reasons, because they are more strict, the lines are more clear, and I really like this very, very original strength of these portraits.
Yeah.
They really have this ancient power, if I don't know whether I can say it like this, but they have this really inner strength, and I really, really, really love them. Of course, I love also this fluffy Rococo, because it's sometimes also absolutely brilliant. But the strength of this early Renaissance is really something that I really love.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. The conference that we've been enjoying over the past 2 days referred to the possibilities and the provocation of face masks and head coverings. I think it's just so suitable to have kind of concluded those 2 days by Volker having you sort of share your work with us, because I think we can see just with those 2 images on the screen that sense of the provocation, but also the possibilities there. So thank you so much for
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
No, not at all. And yeah, just again, a few comments coming through on the chat, thanking you for your presentation and the time that you've shared, really so genuinely and generously. For those of you who have joined us, for obviously, as I've said, in the UK and Germany is this an evening. Thank you very much for your contributions as well. And as I said, do check out, if you aren't already following him, then you should be, Volker's work on Instagram. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that, yeah, so we'll close then, and good night everybody, and take care.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
You were brilliant. I loved the yes, the popular culture reference of your landlord watching Netflix. That was brilliant. We're looking at these Renaissance statues.
Yeah, you'll have to go and have words.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was really, really, really exciting and very, very nice. Thank you very much.
No, not at all. Absolutely. Yeah, really wonderful. A great opportunity. As I said, when Lucy